Hey everyone, welcome to the Seller Finance and Creative Deals podcast. I'm Dan Deppen, and today joined by David Kahl. David, how you doing?
Very good. How about you?
Good, good. Well, thanks for joining. I was excited to have you on because I know you're a pretty prolific seller finance guy, so interested in learning more about, how you do things and approach the space. But, first maybe just give us like a little bit of background on, on who you are.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. So I live in Spartanburg, South Carolina, Spartanburg, Greenville area, and have a background in insurance, but I've been in the real estate field for 9 years now. Well, I guess close to 10 years now. And I started out by doing traditional flips, wholesaling, and rentals. And then in 2017, I discovered the notes world. And since then, that's I still have some rentals and some flips, but my primary business is owner finance notes, and I create the notes, hold on to most of them, and then sell off some of them. So
Hmm.
that's my main business model.
So what drove you to start to shift more from doing rentals to doing seller finance?
Yeah. So before I really knew what seller financing was, when I was first starting out in real estate, I was thinking I had a friend that was a mortgage lender, and and I had tenants that wanted to work towards buying their home, and I thought maybe if they can, while they rent, they can work towards buying a home, that they would take care of the property better, and then later they get a bank loan, cash me out, and I can 1031 it because I've owned it. And essentially, what my mind was trying to figure out was owner financing. And then I happened to stumble across a friend when I was wholesaling a property. I stumbled across a friend that was owner financing properties. He would buy them, and instead of doing a lot of rehab and everything, he would just sell them as is and owner finance them. And it really fascinated me because he was, it was just, he and his brother had over 100 properties that they had turned into notes, and it was just them. They didn't have, they didn't have crews, they didn't have, because it was a paper business. And later they hired an office manager, but to be able to manage that, a lot of properties with, being that streamlined was very fascinating. And I saw how were able to scale, and I saw how once they got to a certain point, their lifestyle was very good, because it is very passive. It's as close to being truly passive as any investment. And so it just really fascinated me. That was in early 2017, and I
Hmm.
did turn my first rental property into a note, and then from there I just started. That's what I focused on.
Yeah, and like what was their model for finding properties that were good candidates to owner
I think
financing?
they would do just the traditional, they do mailers, leads, and then they would what they were doing was they were buying with seller financing from the
Hmm.
from the seller, and then turning around and selling it for more and higher interest, and creating a wrap, and then keeping the spread.
So
So
they were
that's what they were
basically
doing.
creating their own wrap. So they weren't necessarily like assuming an existing loan. They were getting a loan from the seller and then.
Right. Yep. And I mean, they would do some sub too, but they were mostly looking for the free and clear homes.
Hmm.
And I do that. I mean, anytime I can do that, I do that as well. But we do a lot of private money. Use private money to purchase a house, and then what we do a little bit different. If we're gonna sell off the note, we'll wrap it and then sell it off, or season it and then sell it. If we're gonna
Hmm.
keep it, and it doesn't have long-term underlying financing, and then what we'd like to do is hypothecate the note and pledge the note as collateral, borrow against that more long-term financing, and then wipe out that underlying mortgage. So it puts everybody in a better position, including, the buyer. We try to create a win-win situation where it's not just a win for us, it's a win for the buyer, and they're in a safe position. It's a win for the lender.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. I never thought about it like this, but it seems like if you're trying to find good candidates for owner finance properties, like I said, you can do the model you were just talking about where you find people who own the property free and clear, get a note loan from them and create the wrap. Or like I know a lot of the folks doing subject twos want like very little or no equity, so the borrower has an incentive to let them assume it. So it seems like it's one or the other. You don't want like in the middle, either like all the equity or not much equity,
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then it works.
And we do
So
subject twos, it's just have to be somewhat careful with them. I have had them called due before. So,
oh really? So that's a rabbit hole I've been going down because I have so many clients who do those, and I
yeah.
haven't actually done one myself. I'll probably start doing my first ones like next year sometime. But so what happened when it was when yours was called due?
Well, we're actually still negotiating with the bank
Mm-hmm.
because the deal was, they owed up 258,000 on the house, and our cash offer was 220.
Mm-hmm.
Offering enough to pay off the mortgage didn't make sense. They didn't want to take that, and so we offered the subject to, and then that's how we did it. But and we did it, we did it in trust, we did all the right steps.
Mm-hmm.
But it was a small local bank, and the seller would always stop by the bank. I've sold my home to this company, and so she constantly was
Oh,
reminding them that she
geez.
sold her home, and so eventually they called it due. And the funny thing with that one is actually because she during the when it was in before we closed on it, she already went to the bank and told them. And so we said, hey, if we're going to do this, let's go ahead and get permission. We called them up and got permission from them, and they said all was good. And then, but the mistake we made is we didn't get it in writing. So
Oh.
a few months later, they called it due, and we called up the lender and said, hey, let them know that you gave us permission. And he wouldn't answer our calls, and he completely denied that he gave us permission. We didn't have it in writing. So we told them all that, and we've gone back and forth for over a year now. And they've been, but that we're looking at getting it paid off for a lower amount. If not,
Mm-hmm.
we can pay it off and it would still work. So the main thing with the subject twos, I think where people get in trouble if they do a lot of them and they're 85, 90 cents on the dollar. And then if they're doing our business where we, sell with owner financing, and now the what's owed to them, especially after the down payment, is the underlying mortgage is 90% of what's owed to them. And then if that's called due, or then it's hard to pay that off unless you have cash, because if you sell the note, especially if you sell it soon, a lot of times you have to discount it that much or more.
Yeah.
So I always like that property. 365 is what we owner finance it for.
Mm-hmm.
And they owe what, guess they put 35 down, so that they have 330. So even if I had to pay off the full amount, the 250 something, I can sell that note and pay it off, or I can borrow against the note. I have a lot of room there. And so I don't mind doing subject twos like that, but I wouldn't want to build a, whole portfolio of highly leveraged subject to, even if it's cash flowing.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So your wrap loan in that case is a decent bit bigger than the underlying, and so that's what gives you room
right.
to maneuver and sell the loan
Yes.
or whatever. Yeah. Yeah, from what I understand, that's kind of like one of the cardinal rules of setting those up. The interesting
Yeah.
thing to me is most people I talk to don't consider the option of just selling the wrap note and unwinding the thing
Yeah.
if they need to.
Yeah,
If
and
push
it
comes to
depends on
shove.
where you are in the business. Now I have a lot of owner finance loans that has, I think, substitution of collateral. And
Mm-hmm.
so, if I have, a bunch of properties out there where I have substitution of collateral, if for whatever reason I can't borrow on that property to pay that subject to off, or I don't want to because it's high interest private money, and I have a 0% interest loan over here or a 4% interest loan over here, I can always sell that one or borrow against it and move that over to this collateral and pay off that loan. And
Mm-hmm.
so I have now, I'm in a different place than I was when I was starting out, to where I can take a little bit more risk because, I can move funds around and a lot more liquid. And that thanks to the notes business. That's what I like about it. But
Yeah, it becomes a numbers game
yep,
at a point that's kind of what I've done, kind of a similar thing with the portfolio of loans that I own. Now, these were, primarily existing notes that I bought. I didn't originate hardly any of these, but, and especially I've done a lot of like the non-performing space, which is real volatile, but you can kind of take more risk and kind of play the numbers game, so I always think in terms of like probability distributions, like if you have a good model, most of your deals are going to be like solid base hits. A couple of them are going to be fantastic, and then a couple of them are going to get really weird.
yep,
But if you have enough, then if you're doing like one and you happen to get unlucky and that's the one that goes sideways, like then you have a big problem. But if you're able to
right,
do like a whole bunch of those, then if one goes sideways, it's not really a huge deal because you kind of have
yep,
that planned for and baked in
yep,
your models. Yeah, so there's a certain safety and if you can get to enough volume. So
yeah, and structuring things the right way. And I know that adding the substitution of collateral, especially if it's a 0% interest loan or a really low amount,
mm-hmm.
that's one I do not want to have to pay off. So
Sure. Yeah.
for all those, if I wanted to sell that note, or if somebody comes up with bank financing or sells a property, instead of going that away, I just, 150, the last one I did was just 149,000, and they paid us off, and that we took that 149,000, moved it over to a property that had a higher interest loan, paid it off, and now we didn't lose that really low interest, fully amortized loan. So that's been a huge game changer, which is sort of it's notes from the acquisition side instead of the sell side.
Yeah. Yeah. So now maybe talk a little bit about, you talked about borrowing against your notes and doing hypothecations. Like how do you go about finding lenders to do that?
I think for private money lenders, it's not that hard, because it's relationship based, and once they know your business model, a lot of times they're good to lend if they see the collateral is good. But it is a little bit harder, I think, with banks. Finding a local bank
Mm-hmm.
um, is usually the way to go. But it's really, you have to get with somebody that, a lot of times, loan officers, you would think they would understand it, but they a lot of times they don't understand, you know. But if you just break it down, just like, of course, you can lend on a property, have a mortgage, but banks all the time will lend on, equipment. The
Mm-hmm.
equipment loan have the equipment as collateral, and you can pledge all kinds of things as collateral. If you have a note that's tied to a mortgage, that's a very good collateral. That's very good collateral. So if I have, let's say, a $200,000 mortgage, a note in a mortgage, and that mortgage ties me to a property that's worth 250,000, and I take out, $160,000 loan. If I default on that loan, they're going to get that $200,000 note is going to be assigned to them. They can start collecting on that, or they can sign
Mm-hmm.
it off. If that end buyer stops paying, then it's tied to that $250,000 mortgage, and so they're fully collateralized. And if they can
Yeah.
just grasp that, and if you can get that across, I think that's the way that you can get them to lend on it. And it's not common, but it's not too uncommon.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm sure they like don't have too many people knocking on their door asking about that. But on the other hand, it seems odd to have to explain that concept to a bank. Like they should be
I know. Yeah.
all over that, you
Yeah.
would think. So,
Yeah, but you can tell when that if they don't get it, when they start asking questions that don't make sense.
mm-hmm.
So that don't relate exactly to what you're trying to explain. So I think along the whole concept, and if you have a track record, of course, you can show. I know for me, like the debt service coverage ratio, if you have rental properties versus a portfolio of notes, you have a lot more free and clear cash flow on the notes, especially if you have underlying mortgages. And
Mm-hmm.
so you can show the bank that you're in a very good spot. So just because you have $1,000 coming in on a piece of a rental property, and first thing is taxes, insurance, maintenance, setting aside for vacancy, that eats it down to maybe 700. If you have a $600 mortgage, you have $100,000 I'm sorry, $100 a month cash flow versus a note that's $1,000 and a $600, you have a $400 cash flow, that which is four times the cash flow. And it's four times the cash flow. And so that's what happened. That's what caught my eye is when I bought it was actually my second rental property, and I thought I was cash flowing $300 a month. Now I
Mm-hmm.
was a newbie then, but okay, I paid my taxes. It was more than I thought, in, insurance, and then there was some maintenance things. And at the end of the year, on that year, I didn't make anything. Um, when I turned it into this was a very small property, but when I turned it into a owner finance note, I had a $300 underlying mortgage and a $600 payment coming. No, it was $700 payment. So I had $400 of cash flow coming in, and and that you know,
Yeah, and it seems
that's
like
what
that
caught
there
my
was
eye.
also like, yeah, it's also more predictable because you don't necessarily have to worry about a furnace or an AC going or
Yeah,
a
yeah,
roof. You're not on the hook for the capital stuff. I mean, I guess your risk is the loan defaults, and now you got to take it through the legal process, which can be kind of painful. But if you originated it well, that should be a fairly low probability and, something you can recover from
right.
if you need to. So,
Yeah.
and then it was also asking about like, so kind of backing up a little bit, like how do you go about like finding properties or I know you talked about having ones where people own them free and clear and sending mailers, but kind of like what's your process for trying to find properties to acquire that you can turn into to good seller finance deals?
Yeah, so we have a couple of marketing campaigns, and I have two full-time acquisition managers that all they do is you know answer the phone and work leads,
Mm-hmm.
and so we do some mailers, we do some cold call campaigns, and starting to get into pay-per-click as well, and so several different marketing sources, and then we're always from realtors and other wholesalers. We're letting them know that we purchase properties, and so that's our marketing sources. And then we have a weekly meeting with the acquisition team to train, and we specifically talk about buying with owner financing all the time, or
Mm-hmm.
buying at a low enough. We're always throwing out both a really low cash offer, or about a 15% more if they want to sell it to us with seller financing. And
Mm-hmm.
so one out of three or four deals is a seller. It used to be one out of 10. And now, I constantly, and the commission structure is geared towards bonusing more if we can buy with seller financing, because those are very valuable. And
Oh,
so,
these are your acquisition folks
yeah,
that you're
right, right,
bonusing? Yeah.
right. Yeah, yeah. So, constantly, and also what we started doing really is, instead of just sending out mailers, we really track our KPIs now, and we look exactly how many calls are coming in for each type of list and each type of mailer or cold call campaign, and track it all the way down. How many leads did that produce? How many qualified leads? How many appointments? How many offers were made? And how many actually became deals? And then we track it back to how much we made on the property to see what our
Mm-hmm.
return on the marketing is. And so that way we know that, okay, we're in a good place. We're doing five times um, what the cost per deal, and we can crank up marketing. Or
Mm-hmm.
we're only doing two or three times. We need to fix what's going on somewhere in the acquisition process or the marketing we need to fix. So that's really helped a lot. And over the past year, we've really cranked up marketing quite a bit.
No, that's awesome. And you're doing all this within South Carolina, right? or
Yeah,
primarily?
I mean,
Yeah.
we have done some in North Carolina. And I actually started out in North Carolina, but almost everything in South Carolina now. So we're going really deep here.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll probably go to some other states, but we really want to go deep here.
Yeah, and it shows like how many deals are available because, like I know a lot of folks doing stuff very similar to what you're doing, and sometimes we'll even focus just on like one city, if
Yep.
it's a big enough city, and it seems like, yeah, I don't necessarily see a lot of seller finance folks necessarily casting like this huge net where they're doing it across, the whole country or something like that. They're usually doing something like similar to what you are, where like they've kind of got their territory and then they like to go deep,
Yeah, yeah. And I
rather
think
than.
if I do go to another market, I don't want to do one deal, because it takes a
Yeah.
lot to set up to learn all the ins and outs of that state. And even when we're going to different counties, we like to make sure that we're going to do more than one deal. And so,
Mm-hmm.
especially if you don't have the same rehab team and you got to build that up, that's a lot of hassle to do one or two deals. And so if we're
Yeah.
going to go into another market, we're going to go in and build a business there. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, so I think, I mean, and probably for us, it would be the next, I mean, we are in North Carolina some and expanding into Columbia south of us, which is in the same
Uh-huh.
state. But that's a better move than jumping states. But eventually, maybe Tennessee or Georgia would be our next one. Different from, note buyers, of course, a lot of times will buy all over the place, and you can do that with notes a lot more
Yeah.
than you can rental properties.
And I'll do that with notes, especially,
Sure.
performing notes. But for me, if it's, if I'm looking at buying a note in a state where like I've got a good attorney and maybe I've got a good realtor in that city and I'm kind of set up, then I'll be more aggressive on price. Like I'm not averse to going into a brand new state, but all things being equal, like it's got to be like a really good deal,
Yep.
because now I got to do, basically more work. And if that thing defaults, it's just, I can handle it. It's just going to be more like admin work. It gets into a thing where like, what's your time worth?
Yep.
There's more paper
Right.
cuts
Hmm.
and whatnot. So, and then maybe you can talk a little bit about the RIA that, you help run there in South Carolina.
Yeah. Well, I would say that's been uh, where most of my private money lenders and my note buyers, a lot of my note buyers come from.
Mm-hmm.
So that's definitely been a help. That's how I got started. I was introduced to the local RIA back in 2015 in Asheville, North Carolina, and went there for the first time. Was fascinated. I always looked at it real estate from the outside, but it really fascinated me, and I still go and here 10 years later, and have done many deals with the RIA members. So definitely been a really positive asset, part of the business.
Yeah, when I started in notes like 8 years ago, there used to be actually a local, just like a note related meetup that my friend Beth Hale used to run. It's not around anymore, but I still work with some of the folks that I first met there who were investors. So it can definitely create some good long-term relationships and those things for sure.
Absolutely, and
So
good camaraderie. It's good to be able to hang out with people that are like-minded.
yeah,
So
and I
it's
like
not
hearing
the
all
same
the
as going to the Chamber
stories.
of Commerce.
Yeah, I know.
Right. That has its
Yeah,
own purpose, but to getting the right mindset and the right energy and everything, being able to hang around other investors, local investors especially, is it puts you in the right mind space.
yeah, for sure. Because I always get inspired by the people who are doing a lot, and I kind of have the luxury with my job of getting to talk to a lot of folks like you who are doing a lot of stuff. So it's kind of fun, to see all the people who are really going after it. So
Yeah. And we have, I mean, this local RIA is a really good one, but yeah, people that have never done their first deal up to, no guy that owns he and his partners 7,000 plus apartment units. So you have
Mm-hmm.
really big investors and you have people just starting out. And so yeah.
Yeah, it's fun stuff. So anything else you wanted to get into that I didn't bring up before we wrap up here soon?
Yeah, so well, let me ask you this subject to part of things. What are
Yeah.
your thoughts going forward on that?
So my thoughts are, and this is a topic that, I understand at a fairly high level. I'm actually going deep down that rabbit hole to understand the details because I have so many clients doing it. So my view as of right now, and this may change in the coming months as I get deeper into it, who knows, is that they can be very lucrative. They're they can be a really good thing to do. Like if you're willing to put the work in to understand the detail and the nuance and cross all the T's and dot all the I's, right? There's opportunities there because most people don't have have the stomach for that. Um, but I also consider it kind of hard mode, right? So it's one of those things like if you do it right, it can be great. If you do it wrong, like God help you. Like I think of it as kind of like scuba diving that I used to do, right? And if I'm like, scuba diving and gone like 100 feet down in a wreck, in and of itself, it's not that difficult. You're with the guide, you do the training and whatever, like you're paying attention, like it's a pretty straightforward thing. But you know, but if you mess up, you're dead. Then it's not good. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's not hard to get in shape, structure a portfolio in the right way where you can take those on a lot more. So it just takes time and starting out especially. So
yeah, and I think the market conditions are particularly good for it, and probably going to get better because there's so many 3 and 4% loans out
right.
there. And I don't know how it is in South Carolina where you are, but like in Denver where I am, the market's definitely softened. And so, you're seeing more properties that, the sellers having a hard time selling, listings are getting stale and expired, right? And so you've got more sellers that are, potentially more open
Mhm.
to doing that. So I think, the opportunities will be there. But, like there's all those, but there's a lot of nuance to it,
Right.
and there's ways to mess it up, right? So like I
Right.
talked to a lot of people who are doing these and like really know their stuff, and have it dialed, and those folks make a
Right.
lot of money. Occasionally I talk to somebody who's like doing their first one and they don't seem to have a fundamental understanding of how loans even work, and I'm like, how are you pulling this off? One of the things I'm always fascinated by is how, like I said, I consider it kind of the hard mode of real estate investing, but a lot of people are just willing to like dive in head
Right.
first,
Yeah.
as opposed to something like going out and buying a performing note, which is, a little bit unusual. Like most people don't. The note buying world is fairly small, but like if you know how to do it, I feel like it's a fairly straightforward, like pretty simple thing. But like that's the thing that most people are afraid of. People are like afraid of the thing that I consider easy and like going all in on the thing that I consider hard. So it's kind of an interesting dynamic. That's
Yeah,
all.
it is to hear, some of the people come to the notes focus group that you spoke at, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, and they come for months. They've been doing real estate investing for, some of them decades, and for whatever reason, they can't pull the trigger with buying their first note. And I'm thinking, you've done sub twos, you've done all kinds of things. This is not more complicated than that. But it's just, the unknown. People see notes as something really fancy. To me, that's what it seems like. But to me,
Yeah.
I think it's very predictable. Like it's just a very predictable income, and I think that's what makes it very scalable and is very liquid. I mean, selling a note versus rental property.
Mm-hmm.
If I have a note for sale, make some calls, and 2 weeks later is sold, versus a property that has a tenant in it with a 6 month lease left. You can sell it as is, but if you want to maximize the value, you got to wait till the end of the lease and fix it up, put it on the market. It's just so much slower than notes. And so you can cash flow as long as you want, and you can liquidate very quickly, liquidate part of a note, do a partial sell.
Mm-hmm.
It's just very liquid. Once you understand the financing world and substitution of collateral and all that, I mean, it just completely changes your game, and you can move much faster and be a lot more safe when you can start moving your money around.
Yeah, it's interesting because I've seen the same thing where like I've known people like in the where like they kind of hang around the note world and they'll do it for like a few years, but they haven't quite pulled the trigger
Mhm.
on the first one. Whereas like the note creating crowd, it seems like once they do one and get the taste of it, like they just start spooling up. It's like I had Dave Friedman on here recently, and he went from doing like zero seller finance deals to like 40, like
Yeah.
pretty quick. Just
Yeah.
started ripping them out. So cool. Well, David,
Yeah.
thanks so much for joining. How can people get a hold of you if they want to, if they're looking to buy notes or learn
Yeah,
more about
so
them?
th probably the best way is shoot me a text, 828-458-5610. So 828-458-5610, or my email, which is david@carolinafirst.home.com.
All right.
So, yep.
Awesome. Well, David, thanks again. Pleasure having you on.
All right, thank you.
All right.